President Trump has signed more than 160 executive orders since taking office, and there have been more than 300 lawsuits seeking to block those actions. But now those orders are packing a bigger punch, following a Supreme Court ruling that limits the power of federal judges now to issue a nationwide injunction.
This is absolutely wild, and you need to pay attention to what is happening right now because Donald Trump is losing his mind over federal judges in a way we have never seen before. This isn't just a minor political disagreement. This is a foundational battle over who actually holds the power to shape the United States for decades to come. Since taking office, President Trump has signed more than 160 executive orders, but his agenda is being hit by a massive wall of over 300 lawsuits designed to block his every move. While a Supreme Court ruling was supposed to limit the power of federal judges to issue nationwide injunctions, the reality on the ground is reaching a breaking point. Mainstream media will try to tell you this is just another headline, but they are missing the long-term consequences for our entire government system. Trump has gone completely nuclear on federal judges, who keep blocking his executive actions repeatedly, calling them lunatics and radical left judges who could destroy the country. He is furious because a single judge in a single district can shut down a presidential policy across all 50 states with one ruling. On March 20, 2025, Trump issued what can only be described as a final warning. He posted that if Chief Justice John Roberts and the Supreme Court do not fix this toxic situation immediately, our country is in very serious trouble. This is direct, unprecedented pressure aimed squarely at the heart of the judicial branch. When a sitting president tells the highest court in the land that they are the only thing standing between order and catastrophe, the constitutional guardrails are being tested to their absolute limit. This is exactly what people in other countries point to when they describe an authoritarian power grab, a leader demanding that the courts get out of his way so he can govern without interference. Throughout 2025, federal courts have been stepping in to block immigration enforcement, deportation orders, and national security moves, arguing that they are unconstitutional or outside the law. Trump is now asking the Supreme Court to fundamentally rewrite the rules of how American justice works by stripping lower courts of their ability to issue these sweeping injunctions. If he succeeds, it would mark a seismic shift in the balance of power, moving us toward a system where the president is far more powerful and the courts are far more limited in their ability to protect your rights. To truly understand why Donald Trump is in such a state of panic, we have to look closely at the language he is using to attack the judicial branch. He isn't just complaining about losing a case. He is launching a full-scale psychological and political assault on the independence of the courts. Throughout 2025, we have seen a pattern where federal courts across the country have stepped in to halt the administration's most aggressive policies. We are talking about immigration enforcement, mass deportation orders, and sweeping national security moves that judges have flagged as potentially illegal or unconstitutional. For a president who believes his election thing gave him a total mandate, these legal roadblocks feel like a personal betrayal by the system itself. Trump's reaction has been anything but measured. He has publicly labeled these federal judges as lunatics and radical left actors who are actively trying to destroy the country. This is a strategic move to delegitimize any court that stands in his way. But the most chilling moment came on March 20, 2025, when Trump turned his sights directly on the Supreme Court. He didn't just ask for a review. He issued an ultimatum to Chief Justice John Roberts. He warned that if the Supreme Court does not fix this toxic situation immediately, the United States will face very serious trouble. This is direct, high-stakes pressure on the highest court in the land, effectively telling the justices that they must choose between the president's agenda or a national crisis. When you step back and look at this from a global perspective, this is exactly what an authoritarian power grab looks like. It is the moment a leader demands that the legal institutions designed to check his power simply step aside. Trump is essentially arguing that the judicial branch is a risk factor to his version of national security. He wants to consolidate power by removing the most effective tool his opponents have, the nationwide injunction. This tool allows a single judge to stop an unconstitutional policy from being enforced anywhere in the country. Without it, the administration could continue to enforce illegal orders in 49 states, while a case drags on in just one district. This would fundamentally shatter the Western democratic ideal of checks and balances and move the presidency toward a model of private, unchecked rule. Let's talk about what these judges are actually doing that has Donald Trump so visibly shaken, because this is where the mainstream narrative completely misses the plot. They portray this as standard legal friction, but what we are witnessing is the systematic dismantling of a president's signature agenda in real time. Throughout early 2025, the administration pushed aggressive deportation policies using an 18th century law known as the Alien Enemies Act. Trump believed this was his ultimate trump card to bypass modern legal hurdles and institutional gridlock. However, a federal court in Texas recently issued a temporary restraining order halting removals of undocumented migrants at the Raymondville Detention Center. This wasn't a coincidence. It happened just hours after the ACLU filed an emergency lawsuit. Trump's panic isn't just about one detention center. It's about the nationwide injunction. This is the information gap that Washington elites don't want the public to bridge. When a single judge rules that a policy violates due process, that policy doesn't just stop in their district, it stops everywhere across the entire country. To Donald Trump, this is judicial sabotage. He views himself as a leader with a mandate supported by social proof from millions of voters, yet he finds himself repeatedly punched in the face by judges he calls lunatics.
A federal court in Texas issued a temporary restraining order halting removals of undocumented migrants under an old law known as the Alien Enemies Act. This applies to detainees at a detention center near the southern border in Raymondville. This comes just hours after the ACLU filed an emergency lawsuit. The lawsuit follows a U.S. Supreme Court decision on President Trump's use of that act. The U.S. court ruled that those targeted for removal have the right to challenge their cases.
This is why he is demanding that the Supreme Court strip lower courts of this toxic power. He is effectively asking the Supreme Court to rewrite 200 years of judicial precedent so he can govern without interference. This strategy is highly calculated and strategic. By using words like emergency and crisis, Trump is triggering a sense of political FOMO, the fear that the country is running out of time and is in very serious trouble. If the Supreme Court agrees to tie the hands of lower court judges, it would alter the power structure of the U.S. government for generations to come. We are looking at a system where the rule of law becomes secondary to the president's personal will. This is the endgame that has the Western alliance in a frenzy, a presidency that operates like a private business deal, where established institutions are merely obstacles to be cleared away. Think about the consequences if Donald Trump actually gets his wish. If judges can no longer issue nationwide injunctions, the entire legal system enters a state of complete chaos. Right now, when a federal judge makes a ruling on a federal policy, it provides consistency and clarity across all 50 states. But in Trump's ideal world, a specific federal policy could be deemed unconstitutional in a New York court, while remaining perfectly legal and enforceable in Florida. Federal agencies would be forced to operate under a patchwork of completely different and contradictory rules, depending on which geographic district they are in at any given moment. This is an administrative nightmare designed to slow everything down and make it nearly impossible to stop the president's policies comprehensively. This leads us to a critical realization about this panic. Trump wants to win without any obstacles in his way. Every president in American history has faced legal setbacks, and every president has been frustrated by the courts. However, the difference between Donald Trump and his predecessors is fundamental. Most leaders accept that courts have the authority to block policies they find unconstitutional. That is how the system of checks and balances is designed to function. Trump is not doing that. He is launching a direct assault on the judicial system itself, demanding that the Supreme Court strip lower courts of their power, so he never has to face a serious legal roadblock again. If the Supreme Court agrees to gut this power, the rule of law in America effectively becomes meaningless. In that scenario, the president, and not the courts, becomes the ultimate decider of what is constitutional. This is a massive power play aimed at consolidating executive authority at the expense of the judicial branch. It is about changing the rules of the game so that Trump no longer has to win political debates or wait for judges to be appointed over time. He simply wants the courts to be unable to stop him regardless of how the Constitution is interpreted. This shift would fundamentally alter the power structure of the entire American government system for generations to come, moving us toward a reality where the executive branch is essentially unchecked. It is a seismic shift that would be felt for decades to come. Here is the most concerning part that most people are completely missing. The ripple effects of this case are enormous, and they are going to affect literally everyone watching this video right now. If the Supreme Court decides to rule against nationwide injunctions, it doesn't just clear the path for Trump's immigration agenda. It shatters the glass for every single legal protection you rely on in your daily life. We are talking about the environment, healthcare, labor laws, and your fundamental civil rights. Every type of federal litigation meant to keep the government in check would be comprehensively gutted, leaving the average citizen vulnerable to unchecked executive overreach. Let me give you a concrete example of what this means for your rights in a democracy. Imagine a federal agency violates voting rights laws in a massive, systemic way. Under the current system, a single judge could issue a nationwide injunction to stop that violation immediately and everywhere, ensuring a fair election process. But under the Trump rules, a judge could only block it in their specific geographic district. That means in the rest of the country, potentially illegal voting requirements would stay in place. Elections could happen and be decided under rules that a federal judge has already deemed unconstitutional. By the time the case is settled years later, the damage to the democratic process is already permanent and irreversible. It is the same story for the water you drink and the air you breathe. If a federal agency relaxes pollution standards or allows toxic dumping in violation of the Clean Water Act, a judge might rule it illegal but only be able to stop it in one small district. Pollution continues everywhere else, people get sick, and communities are harmed while the case drags on for years in the appeals courts. This is exactly why this moment is so dangerous for our democracy. Trump is asking for a system where the government is no longer accountable to the law nationwide. He is signaling to his appointees on the Supreme Court that he expects them to weaken their own power to enforce the Constitution. If they bow to this pressure, we move toward a system where the president's will is the law, and the courts are merely spectators to the erosion of your rights. Let's talk about the impossible choice facing the Republican establishment and the conservative majority on the Supreme Court right now. This is the most intense political pressure cooker in modern history. Donald Trump has successfully reshaped the federal judiciary, appointing 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court personally during his first term: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Now, he is effectively calling in those chips. By publicly demanding that the court fix the issue of nationwide injunctions immediately, he is sending an undeniable signal to the justices he put there. I expect you to rule my way. This isn't just a legal request, it's a high-stakes loyalty test that puts Chief Justice John Roberts and the conservative wing in a corner they cannot easily escape. The GOP is currently at a dangerous crossroads. On one side, you have the base that wants Trump to govern without any interference from what he calls lunatic or radical left judges. On the other, you have the institutionalists who realize that if the Supreme Court ties the hands of lower courts, they are effectively dismantling the very system of checks and balances that protects everyone, including conservatives, when they aren't in power. If the court grants Trump this authority, they aren't just giving it to him. They are handing it to every future president, including those the GOP might find ideologically dangerous. This is the exit ramp dilemma for the party. Do they stay with the leader and risk turning America into a system where the president's word is the law, or do they protect the institution of the court and face the political consequences? Trump's hand-picked justices are now facing a constitutional stress test. Trump's rhetoric, specifically using words like toxic, unprecedented, and very serious trouble, is carefully calculated to make this look like a national emergency that requires them to override 200 years of judicial power. If they rule in his favor to curtail nationwide injunctions, they are essentially telling the country that the president's agenda is more important than the court's ability to enforce the Constitution effectively and comprehensively. This is the endgame for executive power. We are watching the potential birth of a system where the rule of law becomes a mere suggestion, and the president becomes the final arbiter of what is constitutional. The stakes for the GOP, the court, and the future of the American experiment have never been higher. This is a weird and dangerous moment for American democracy, and we need to be very clear about the trajectory we are currently on. Think about the reality of the situation. Donald Trump is the sitting president. His party holds majorities in both chambers of Congress, and he is supported by a conservative-leaning Supreme Court that he helped shape. Yet, despite this immense level of control over the levers of government, he is still publicly lashing out at judges and demanding even more power to bypass constitutional limits. At what point is it enough? This is how authoritarian systems actually develop, not with a sudden explosion or a military coup overnight, but gradually, step by strategic step. They begin with a leader who complains that the existing institutions are obstacles, toxic, or lunatics. They start with a leader asking for rule changes that consolidate authority and remove the primary checks on his power. What we are witnessing is the systematic normalization of executive overreach. Each time a judicial check is weakened or ignored, the president becomes less accountable to the law and the Constitution. Trump's aggressive push to eliminate nationwide injunctions is a direct move in that authoritarian direction. It sets up a system where he can do basically whatever he wants because the institutional guardrails have been systematically removed or made irrelevant. This isn't just about one specific president or one election cycle. It's about a fundamental shift in how power operates in the United States. If a leader can successfully pressure the courts to weaken their own ability to oversee the executive branch, the entire concept of the rule of law begins to collapse. The truly scary part is that this strategy might actually work, because Trump has the votes on the Supreme Court to make it happen. This Supreme Court case is one of the most important moments for presidential power in decades, perhaps generations. The ruling will decide whether the courts remain a co-equal branch of government or become merely spectators to the president's will. If Trump succeeds, he will have effectively reshaped the American government system for decades to come, moving us toward a reality where the president is way more powerful and the courts are way more limited. This is the end game that has the entire legal community in a state of panic. A presidency that is no longer accountable to the law. So where does this all leave us? What is the actual end game here? We are approaching a moment that will define the American government system for the next 50 years. This upcoming Supreme Court case is not just another legal battle or a routine piece of political theater. It is the most significant test of presidential power in decades, perhaps in generations. If Donald Trump succeeds in convincing the court to eliminate or severely curtail nationwide injunctions, the very nature of American democracy will be fundamentally reshaped before our eyes. The stakes for you and your family could not be higher. This is the bottom line. The move to weaken federal judges is a direct shift toward a system where the president is far more powerful and the courts are far more limited in their ability to protect your individual rights. If the rule of law becomes something that only applies in one small judicial district at a time, while a president continues to enforce unconstitutional policies everywhere else, then the Constitution itself becomes a mere suggestion rather than the supreme law of the land. The groups that rely on the courts for protection, civil rights organizations, environmental activists, immigrants, and ordinary citizens fighting for their voting rights, will lose their most effective tool for holding the government accountable. This is why you need to be paying close attention right now. This isn't just about Trump versus the radical left or a bickering match between branches of government. It is about whether the system of checks and balances that has protected American liberty for over 200 years will survive this presidency. Trump's public pressure on Chief Justice John Roberts is a final warning to the entire judicial branch. Get out of the way, or be stripped of your power. If he wins this fight, he won't just have won a case, he will have fundamentally rewritten the American government system for decades to come. We are covering this story as it develops because the ruling in this Supreme Court case will shape literally everything about your rights and the future of executive power going forward. This is the seismic shift we've been talking about. The moment the anchor of the democratic world either holds firm or finally gives way. Stay tuned, because the next update could change everything you thought you knew about how this country works.